What if the person you trust the most turns into your worst nightmare? Megan Newborough thought she was meeting someone she trusted, but that decision cost her everything. Today, we unravel a case that shocked England and broke the hearts of a close-knit family. A young woman, just days away from her 24th birthday, vanishes without a trace. What followed was a chilling discovery that no one could have anticipated. August 6, 2021. It was just another Friday evening in the quiet Newborough household. Megan, their bright and cheerful daughter, was preparing to head out. Casually dressed, she hummed a tune, full of life, not a worry in the world. Her parents watched her with loving eyes, reassured by her excitement as she got ready for what seemed to be a typical night out. They trusted she was meeting someone familiar, someone she felt safe with. But as Megan reached the door, her mother hesitated, just for a moment. Something felt off. A slight shift in the air. A mother's instinct, perhaps? But she brushed it aside, smiling, and wished her daughter a good evening. Megan waved back, her face glowing with excitement, unaware that this would be her final goodbye. As the night went on, the Newboroughs waited for Megan's return. The hours ticked by, slowly turning into a nightmare. Texts went unanswered. Calls rang and rang, only to fall silent. Anxiety settled in like a dark cloud, and what began as an ordinary night quickly became a parent's worst fear: Megan wasn't coming back. August 7th, 2021.
You know, she'll see you soon.
The sun rose on August 7th, but inside the Newborough home, darkness had already set in. Megan hadn't come home. Hours had passed, and her parents' initial concern had now twisted into pure terror. Her father, pacing the floor, muttered to himself she was supposed to be back, just a couple of hours. But those hours had stretched into a sleepless, agonizing night. Desperation clawed at their hearts as they scrambled to make sense of her absence. They reached out to friends. No one had heard from her. Calls went unanswered, text messages hung in limbo. Her social media, silent. It was as if Megan had vanished into thin air, leaving her family gripped by a spiraling sense of dread. With shaking hands, they called the authorities and reported her missing. But the hours continued to slip away, each one heavier than the last. The search intensified as they revisited every detail of the previous night: who she was meeting, where she was going. Every minute brought new fear, new questions, but no answers. But Megan hadn't just disappeared. She had left behind a trail of chilling clues that, once uncovered, would lead to something far worse than they could have ever imagined. The horror was only just beginning. As panic set in, the search for Megan began in earnest. The police, now fully involved, turned to technology for answers. Using automatic number plate recognition, they began tracking her car, a glimmer of hope in an otherwise grim situation. Late that night, her vehicle was seen driving away from her home, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a ghost slipping away unnoticed. But where had she gone? And more importantly, who was she with? The police retraced her steps, their investigation narrowing in on Ross McCallum, a name that meant little to her parents but held the key to unlocking the nightmare that was about to unfold. Ross, her new romantic interest, became the center of their search. The officers arrived at the McCallum residence, tension thick in the air as they questioned. The answers were vague, unsettling. Then, the search led them to a local pub, where Ross sat, casual, cooperative, but something was off. His eyes darted, his hands fidgeted. He smiled as he spoke of a pleasant evening with Megan, but the mask of calm was paper-thin. Then, back at his house, the real story began to surface. The police stumbled upon something that sent a chill down their spines: a dark, wet stain in the living room. It was a clue, a whisper of the unspeakable horror that had taken place within those walls. And as the officers exchanged uneasy glances, one thing was clear: this was only the beginning of a far more sinister tale. The air was thick with anticipation as officers entered Ross McCallum's home. What had been hidden behind his calm demeanor would now come to light. The once ordinary living room was in disarray, overturned furniture, chaotic, as if a struggle had taken place. And then, in the eerie silence, they saw it, a dark stain creeping along the skirting boards. Blood. Faint, but unmistakable. Ross's story was beginning to unravel, and with it, the fear that Megan's fate had taken a terrifying turn.
Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
As the officers moved cautiously through the house, the sense of dread deepened. Every step felt heavy, as if they were walking into something far worse than they had imagined. The smears of blood hinted at violence, a desperation to cover something up. The walls, the floors, each corner seemed to tell a part of the story, but not the whole truth. And where was Megan? Had she been here? Was she still alive? The questions buzzed relentlessly, but the answers remained just out of reach. The investigation was taking on a new, darker tone. Each officer exchanged glances, the weight of what they were uncovering hanging over them. But then, as they delved deeper, the realization struck: this wasn't just a case of a missing girl anymore. It was something far more sinister. Ross knew where Megan was. And the truth, when revealed, would send shockwaves through everyone involved. It was the dead of night, the air unnervingly still, as the search team moved through the deserted lane. The only sounds were the crunching of boots on gravel and the distant hum of a police helicopter circling overhead. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, beams dancing across the undergrowth, searching for something, anything. Then, one being faltered, catching on a shape hidden beneath the thick vegetation. It was a moment that seemed to stretch forever. As the officers approached, their hearts pounded, a sense of dread creeping in. There, lying in the shadows, they found her. Megan. Partially clothed, her body lifeless, her throat slashed. The flicker of the flashlight caught the fabric of her clothing, stained, torn, a silent witness to the horrors she had endured. The scene was haunting, but the true horror lay in the brutality of her murder. 14 savage cuts to her neck. Yet, it wasn't the slashes that had taken her life. Strangulation had ended it. A calculated, intimate form of violence that chilled the officers to their core. In that moment, the full weight of the case crashed down on them. This wasn't just a murder, it was vicious, deliberate. As they stood over Megan's lifeless body, one question consumed them all: who could do something so monstrous? And as the investigation pressed on, the truth would only become more disturbing. With Megan's body found, the true horror of what had happened began to unfold. Investigators worked around the clock, piecing together a timeline that would reveal a monstrous plan. It was in Ross's house that Megan had met her end, strangled in a moment of terrifying intimacy. But Ross wasn't finished. He had a plan. Cold, calculated, and chilling in its precision. As investigators retraced his steps, a disturbing pattern emerged. Ross, the same man who pretended to be concerned, sending Megan messages asking where she was, had already moved into cover-up mode. While he played the part of the worried boyfriend, CCTV cameras captured the truth. There he was, driving through the night, disposing of Megan's clothes, her belongings, anything that could tie him to the crime. Every move was deliberate. Every step carefully planned. But Ross couldn't hide everything. Evidence began to surface, and it told a story darker than anyone could have imagined. Megan's phone, tossed carelessly into a hedge. Her glasses, crushed in Ross's fist. Piece by piece, the facade Ross had built was crumbling. And as the investigators uncovered the truth, one thing became clear: Ross wasn't just a suspect. He was a predator, calculating and dangerous, whose every move had been planned to avoid suspicion. But now, his carefully constructed web of lies was beginning to unravel.
Leaving for a few hours most evenings was not at all unusual.
October 2022. The courtroom was packed, a hushed tension hanging in the air as the trial of Ross McCallum began. His expression was a carefully crafted mask of remorse as he claimed to suffer from PTSD, portraying himself as a victim of his own traumatic past. But the reality was far darker. The prosecutor stood tall, armed with the truth, peeling back the layers of Ross's facade. With each word, he painted a vivid picture of a man consumed by rage, a rage ignited by humiliation when his performance failed to satisfy. It was in that moment of fury, the prosecutor asserted, that Ross had snapped, taking Megan's life in a fit of unbridled anger. The defense tried desperately to shift the blame, to distract from the horror of the crime, but the jury wasn't fooled. They listened intently, their faces hardened as the evidence stacked against Ross grew insurmountable. In just 90 minutes, they returned with a verdict, guilty of murder. But as the gavel fell, echoing through the courtroom, a chilling reality set in. Justice had been served, but it was a hollow victory. Nothing could bring Megan back. Her family, shattered and scarred, was left to grapple with the loss of a beloved daughter and sister, taken from them far too soon. In the wake of tragedy, the Newborough family stood resolute, determined to honor Megan's memory in a way that would resonate far beyond their grief. They organized a marathon, each step echoing with the love they had for her, raising money for causes that reflected her kind spirit. With each mile run, they fought against the shadows that had engulfed their lives, channeling their sorrow into something profound. Yet, amid the courageous effort, the emptiness left by Megan's absence lingered, a haunting reminder that no matter how far they ran, she would never cross that finish line with them. Her laughter, her warmth, her light, gone, but forever etched in their hearts. As they established a foundation in her name, a flicker of hope shone through their pain. But their reflections turned somber, echoing the chilling truth of Megan's fate. Sometimes, the kindest hearts are the most vulnerable, they realized. She had lost her life reaching out to someone who didn't deserve her trust. Her story serves as a stark reminder that darkness can lurk behind even the most familiar faces. In the end, it's not just a loss, it's a warning, a call to cherish the light while we can and to remain vigilant against the hidden dangers of the world. Thank you for joining us today as we uncovered the heartbreaking case of Megan Newborough, a story that serves as a haunting reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Remember to stay safe and always be aware of the company you keep. In a world where trust can sometimes lead to tragedy, vigilance is our greatest ally. We'll see you next time with more chilling true crime stories, diving deep into the shadows of humanity. If you found this story as shocking as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth true crime content. Your support helps us continue shedding light on these important stories. Until next time, stay safe.